Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete and updated Yelan guide. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Yelan, covering everything you need to know about this amazing character, going into detail on her best builds, teams, playstyles, constellations, and so much more. Yelan is definitely one of the strongest 5-star characters overall, especially as a support who can fit so many different teams and just be consistently a good option. If that wasn't enough, since her last rerun banner, we now have the somewhat new Dendro element and its reactions, which are teams where Yelan can shine exceptionally well, so a lot has changed with regards to her place in the meta, not only being good in her already existing teams, but now also being good with the Dendro element, which means that we have a lot to talk about in this video, so I don't want to waste any time in the intro. Before we begin though, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and with all that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so starting things off, let's talk about Yelan's talents and general playstyle, talk about what role she serves on your account, and why she's such a great character overall. Well, first things first, the main part of her kit is going to be her elemental burst. Her elemental burst creates this dice around her that will constantly fire a coordinated attack of hydro damage whenever your active character uses a normal attack. This damage will scale on your Yelan's max HP and does have a very good scaling, as it will hit 3 times every single time. Because of that, Yelan can deal really high single target damage and apply a great amount of hydro consistently from off field for your entire burst duration. This ability will last for 15 seconds and have an 18-second cooldown, so only 3 seconds of downtime, and it has a 70 energy cost, which is something you have to build around by building enough energy recharge, and especially by pairing her with another hydro character if you choose to do so. Throughout your burst duration, you will also give your active character a bit more damage, 1% more, increasing by 3.5% every second, stacking up to a maximum of 50. And so because of Yelan's personal damage and the extra damage that you're giving your active character, maximizing your burst uptime and using it as a core part of your kit is going to be essential. Other than that though, you have an elemental skill that is a pretty standard skill. It just deals a bit of hydro damage and gives you energy, but what's nice about it is that you can run around throughout its duration, mark enemies that you run into contact with, so you can run and try to hit every enemy around you, and then when you exit your skill by pretty much pressing any button or pressing your E again, it will then deal that hydro damage. Its cooldown is 10 seconds and scales purely on your HP, as does your burst, which means that stats like attack percent are completely useless on her, and you can focus instead on increasing your max HP, your energy recharge, and your crit in order to maximize your entire kit's damage. But obviously more on that in the artifact section. If that wasn't enough, you also have a passive talent that will increase your HP based on how many party types you have, and we'll talk about Yelan's best teams a bit later in the video in a very important section. Usually this passive is just a nice bonus, but it doesn't typically affect how you're building your teams, generally speaking. Lastly, it's also worth noting that your charge attack, you actually have a special one called a breakthrough barb, where Yelan can charge it very fast, 80% faster than a normal one, and then it will deal AoE hydro damage based on your max HP. This happens once you're out of combat for 5 seconds, it will charge up, and then you can fire it to help finish off some enemies. This isn't typically optimal and not usually used in your rotations, but it's a nice bonus thing to know if you ever want to finish off an enemy or have a little bit of downtime. Do keep in mind though that this becomes more important with constellations like your C6, but more on that in the constellation section. Lastly, before moving on, you should know that your talent priority is obviously to maximize your burst. It's way more important than anything else and the core part of your kit, but after that you can level your skill, and then you can either ignore your normal attacks or level them a bit if you plan on using your charge attacks. Last, I wanted to mention that you should definitely try to level your Yelan as high as possible, ideally get her all the way to 90, as she's a character who scales on HP, which means that levels are more important to her and her damage than with a standard attack scaling character, so definitely level her as high as you can if you have the resources to. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's move on to some more advanced information about Yelan and her hydro application. First things first, let's talk about how much hydro she can apply from off field and compare her to another hydro support like Xingqiu, who's been at the top of the meta for so long now. Well, as you guys may know by now, since it's Yelan's rerun, Yelan does have good off-field hydro application. Now, the exact amount that it is isn't quite as high as Xingqiu, especially if you don't have any constellations on Yelan, to where I wouldn't typically use her to replace Xingqiu, but using her alongside him creates a really powerful team of a ton of hydro damage and a ton of hydro application, whereas even using her alone as a standalone hydro option, as long as your on-field character is normal attacking, can oftentimes be enough hydro for most team comps. What I mean by that is the following. While Xingqiu does apply more hydro, especially with his 6 constellation, but even without it, allowing your vaporize carry like Hu Tao to consistently vaporize every hit, if you're using Yelan as your only hydro, not only will it be enough for teams like Electrocharge or Hyperbloom, as long as you are, as I said, normal attacking, but for vaporize in particular with Hu Tao, who is one of the primary pyro damage dealers, vaporizing can sometimes be inconsistent, but you can still manage to do it as long as you don't apply too much pyro. What this means in practice is with a character like Hu Tao, for example, you're going to be doing one normal attack into a charge attack, and when you do that with Yelan, you can usually vaporize all of your charge attacks, which is what matters. The reason why it can feel inconsistent is because if you do any other Hu Tao combo like 2 normal attacks into a charge attack, or run her with another pyro character, or have anything that can disrupt your elemental application, then it can be too much and you can miss out on some vaporizes. With that said, when you pair Yelan and Xingqiu together in a team, while there are many strengths which I'll cover shortly, just being able to apply that much hydro allows your Hu Tao to do a more more standard combo of 2 normal attacks into a charge attack, which means yes, she'll apply a bit more pyro, but she'll also be able to consistently vaporize without you having to worry about anything. While I don't want this section to be too confusing and too focused on Hu Tao, the conclusion of what I'm trying to say is the following. Yelan usually applies enough hydro from off field, but it isn't quite as much as someone like Xingqiu, which means that usually running her alone is fine and enough hydro, but pairing her with Xingqiu creates a very powerful duo that I oftentimes will recommend. But more on this in the team comp section later, where we will go into a bit more detail on double hydro and Yelan's best teams, generally speaking. Another bit of information you should know is that you should pretty much always try to weave in normal attacks once your burst is active to apply hydro as often as possible. While this may seem straightforward, it even means that in between your other characters' abilities, like for example other support characters or even your Yelan herself, if you use your burst, weave in a normal attack before doing like your elemental skill, if you choose to use your skill after your burst, or when you swap characters, you can do a normal attack and then use their skill just to deal as much damage and apply as much hydro as possible in pretty much any rotation. Alright, next up, let's actually get into how you want to build your Yelan. First things first, let's talk about the artifacts you want on her, both sets and stats, to maximize your damage and overall utility. Well, first things first, as we saw earlier in the video, your burst damage is going to be everything. Yelan's damage will pretty much all come from her burst, which makes the Emblem of Severed Fate 4-piece the go-to set for her and the best one pretty much by far for your Yelan. This is because the 2-piece will give you 20% energy recharge, and then the 4-piece will convert your energy recharge into burst damage, increasing your burst damage by 25% of your energy recharge up to a maximum of 75%. This means that your Yelan is going to get free energy recharge from the 2-piece and then just free burst damage from the 4-piece, since you already need a lot of energy recharge on your Yelan anyways, making this set effect extremely good. Now do keep in mind that while we'll cover exactly how much energy recharge you need on Yelan very shortly, even if you're on the lower end and are running a team that can get away with less energy recharge than like the average Yelan, this 4-piece set will still be amazing because of the burst damage that it gives you being pretty much second to none. Now with that said, if you don't have a good 4-piece emblem set or have much better substats on other sets, you can mix and match 2-pieces such as the 2-piece Noblesse Oblige, 2-piece Heart of Depth, 2-piece Tenacity of the Millilith, or 2-piece Emblem, all of which being viable and similar options, so you can pick the ones that have the best substats for you. Generally speaking though, I highly recommend getting a 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, especially given how much energy recharge your Yelan will need. In fact, now that we talked about the artifact sets, we can actually get into the artifact stats you're looking for and actually get into how much energy recharge your Yelan does want depending on your team. Now first things first, I want to say this highly varies. Genuinely, if you're running your Yelan as the only hydro character on your team versus if you have another hydro like Xingqiu, which is a very popular meta team that we'll cover later, or if you run her with Raiden Shogun, or if you run her on a Favonius weapon with Favonius weapons potentially on other characters, your energy recharge needs can vary by an insane amount. But with that said, here are some general ER ranges that you'll need. For a standard Yelan, you want around 200 to 260 energy recharge, with the range varying based on your team and playstyle. Do keep in mind, however, that a Favonius Warbow, which we'll talk about in the very next section, will not only give you energy recharge, but will also, through its passive, reduce how much energy you actually need, how much energy recharge you need to build, because it generates particles for you. Because of that, your range can be a bit lower, usually being around 180 to 200, but again, this all does highly vary based on your team and rotation. For example, you can use Yelan's skill once or twice before using her burst, which will obviously change how much energy you're actually generating. Lastly, if you use Yelan with another hydro character like Xingqiu, then as I mentioned, your ER needs will be lower, and the same can be said with a Raiden Shogun, and that range in a double hydro team is typically anywhere from 160 to 200 or 210 energy recharge depending on your playstyle, team, and rotation. I know this is a lot more variable than most of my energy recharge requirements, so I'm sorry if it was a bit confusing, but I tried to put some numbers to give you guys a general range as to what will work. So do test out what works for you. Just make sure you can use your burst on cooldown and have enough energy recharge to do that. Once you have that, you can start looking into more offensive stats like crit rate, crit damage, and HP percent. Those 3 stats are going to be your main ones, as Yelan is a character who scales very heavily with HP and obviously with crit. In fact, while crit is generally the go-to to maximize your damage on any character, with Yelan, while that is still often the case, HP is usually not far behind or about as good as crit, and so both of these stats are going to be very important to maximize. Because of that, on your sands, you're going to look for either HP percent or energy recharge, depending on which one you need. Obviously, if you don't have enough energy recharge on your substats, go for an energy recharge sands. It is very good. And if you already have enough, then go for HP on your sands. For your other pieces, while the normal build is to go hydro damage bonus on your goblet, and then either crit rate or crit damage on your circlet, depending on which one you need more of, there are situations where you can actually go for HP percent on either your circlet or your goblet. Generally speaking, I would recommend keeping your goblet hydro damage bonus, and then for your circlet, either going for crit or for HP percent, depending on which one you kind of need more of or which one has better substats. For example, a HP circlet is usually only a couple of percentages behind a crit circlet, so if your substats are a lot better and you don't have that much HP on your Yelan, then going for an HP circlet is perfectly viable and is even what I run a lot of the time, depending on what sands I'm running. For example, as the more HP you have, the less it becomes valuable. Like for example, if you already have HP on your sands and and good HP substats, then a crit circlet will be even better than an HP circlet otherwise would be. But generally speaking, an HP circlet is not that far behind a crit one, and an HP goblet is also kind of viable. Just don't run HP on too many pieces, as the more you have, the less it becomes valuable. With that said, you typically want to go for around 30k HP in case you're looking for just a number, but obviously higher than this can still be very good, and you want to be maximizing your crit as well, as high as you can get it. Because of that, your main stats are very flexible, with the go-tos typically being HP or ER on your sands, hydro damage on your goblet, and then crit on your circlet, with HP not being far behind. Next up, let's talk about the best weapons for your Yelan and which ones you should go for. Well, generally speaking, I want to start by mentioning that everyone has access to the Favonius Warbow, which you can get from a quest just by doing the story very early on in the game. Because of that, everyone should have at least one Favonius Warbow on their account, and even at R1, this can be a great option for Yelan, meaning that everyone has a good weapon for her and shouldn't feel forced to pull for an upgrade or get another weapon. I really want to emphasize this because I believe the Favonius Warbow is greatly underrated, especially on Yelan, who needs a lot of energy recharge, as we saw earlier, and this weapon gives you 60% from its stats alone, while also giving you more when you crit and proc its effect for both your Yelan and your entire team as well. On top of that, the low base stack of this weapon is really not a big deal at all, as Yelan is a character who scales on HP and not attack. Because of that, this weapon is amazing and definitely is your best 4-star overall as a general option for Yelan. It can even be better than some of the 5-star options, especially if you need the energy that it gives you and your entire team. Because of that, I really love Favonius, but there are better options in certain instances like 5 stars or more offensive ones if that is what you're trying to build and don't need more ER. In fact, starting things off with 5-star weapons, the Aqua Simulacra and the Elegy for the End are both really good and can both be your best in slot depending on what you're going for. The Aqua Simulacra is your signature weapon, and it's the best for your Yelan's personal damage as it gives you a ton of crit damage and also a really good effect for Yelan especially that will just be way more DPS than any other weapon for your Yelan in particular. Because of that, it's a great weapon, but it definitely is not a needed one for a few reasons. First of all, the Elegy for the End in certain teams that are maximizing reactions, like for example a Hu Tao Vaporize team, can be really good and even potentially your best in slot on Yelan, as it will buff your other party members when you proc its effect by giving them 100 elemental mastery and 20% attack at refinement rank 1. Because of that, it can maximize the damage of your other party members while also giving your Yelan 55% energy recharge, which is really needed, making it an amazing weapon for Yelan and sometimes your best in slot. If that wasn't enough, while the Aqua Simulacra and Elegy are both amazing, Fav can even sometimes be better if all you want is energy, but generally speaking, I do believe Elegy for the End is the best for reaction teams and Aqua Simulacra is the best for your personal damage and just a good option overall. Those 3 bows are therefore going to be the ones I recommend for Yelan, as everyone has access to at least the Favonius Warbow. With that said, there are situations when other weapons can be good as well, like if you don't have a Fav available, it's on another character, or don't need the energy. Because of that, here are some other weapons that can work. First of all, the Slingshot is a good 3-star option that is just a stat stick for the 30% crit rate that it gives you at level 90. The Recurve Bow as a 3-star option for free HP percent. Moon, especially with the refinement, that will increase your burst damage, despite the attack stat not being useful. Similarly, the Stringless with high refinements effect can be not bad for burst damage for free, and the same can be said with the Sacrificial Bow for extra energy, although generally speaking, Favonius is going to be better, but a high refinement Sacrificial Bow, if you're using your skill twice, can be viable. Other good options include pretty much any crit weapon, again, for your Yelan's personal damage, like the Skyward Harp, Polar Star, Thundering Pulse, Viridescent Hunt, or just really any offensive bow. Generally speaking though, since Yelan needs so much energy recharge, I think going for an ER weapon, like the Favonius Warbow or the Elegy for the End, is a really good idea, but if you just want to maximize your damage, then any of the crit bows I mentioned, or especially Aqua Simulacra if you pull for that, are going to be good options. Alright, next up, let's talk about Yelan's Constellations and how good they are overall. Well, first things first, I want to say that Yelan is in a pretty unique spot in the sense that she has some of the strongest constellations, like notably her 2nd and 6th one, but is a very powerful unit even without them. Honestly, I believe she's an S tier support even at C0, which is why I don't believe you should be forced to get any constellations, and why my Yelan is performing so well, as you've seen through the footage in the video, even at C0. With that said, if you want constellations, there are a few decent ones, so let's go over them in order. Starting things off, her first constellation will give you another charge of your skill, which just means more energy and a bit more damage, assuming you can use your skill twice. Next up, your second constellation will be a very good stopping point if you want to get an early constellation for your Yelan. This is because it will give you more hydro damage and more hydro application through your burst passively as you are attacking on any character. In fact, your burst will fire an additional water arrow, which will scale on your HP and be really nice to increase your single target damage, and can also be nice for the bonus hydro application if you're using Yelan as a solo hydro in, for example, a Hu Tao team. It can make your vaporizing more consistent and can just be nice overall as an increase to your damage and hydro application. Moving on, your C3 and 5 will increase your talent levels, with C3 increasing your burst, so it's the more relevant one, and C5 being relatively useless. Your fourth constellation will increase all of your party members' max HP after using your skill, and honestly, it's very nice for your Yelan and can be especially nice if you're running other HP scaling characters like, for example, Hu Tao, but other than that, it's not the most flexible or versatile constellation and not the strongest overall, but nice in certain team comps with HP scaling characters, or at least as a small damage increase to your Yelan. Lastly, your 6th constellation is an incredibly popular one and definitely one of the best, if not the best C6s in the game for speedrunning and just for damage overall, as it will make your Yelan's normal attacks be special breakthrough barbs when you're inside of your burst. This will last for 5 arrows or 20 seconds, but usually 5 arrows, and will make your following 5 normal attacks very powerful sources of hydro damage that will scale on your HP. They will be considered charge attack damage similarly to a breakthrough barb as we saw in the talent section, and as you guys can see from when I tested a whale Yelan's account, it is incredibly impressive. With that said, obviously it's not needed, but as far as C6s go, if it's one that you want to get, it is definitely a good one, but I don't really like hyping up a C6 as I don't want people to feel forced to spend. With that said, even with your C6, you can still build the same artifacts as you still will typically want energy recharge, but it can also make other sets like mix and matching 2 pieces such as Heart of Depth and Tenacity of the Millilith more viable for your Yelan. Alright, now moving on, let's get into one of the most important sections of the video, which is regarding Yelan's best teams. Now, while team comps typically define a character's strength, as you want to be putting them in a team that lets them shine and where they really have a strong role, with Yelan, while this is true, I want to first mention how versatile she is as a good off-field hydro support. In fact, you can run her in pretty much any single team that needs a hydro support as long as you are normal attacking on a character to proc her elemental burst. This is true for not only any hydro reaction based team, but also when you just want a powerful off-field support, as Yelan's damage is really high even when you don't factor in how good hydro is as an element. So with that said, here are a bunch of teams and synergies that you can run with Yelan. Starting things off, you can run her as either a solo hydro or a double hydro with Xingqiu in pretty much any of the teams that we're going to be talking about. Now, as we saw earlier in the video, this double hydro synergy between Yelan and Xingqiu is something that is very strong and usually recommended for Yelan's best teams. While I typically wouldn't recommend upgrading or replacing your Xingqiu with Yelan, I do recommend using them together or using them in separate teams if you need 2 good hydro appliers. Now, while I mentioned why they're good together earlier, as I said, the main reason is just a ton of hydro application, a ton of damage, especially single target, while also buffing each other's damage in many different ways, like notably giving a ton of hydro particles to one another, which alleviates how much energy recharge you need. So basically, running 2 hydro characters means you can run less energy recharge, which means you can build more crit and do more damage. If that wasn't enough, Xingqiu also has his 2nd constellation, which will decrease the hydro resistance of enemies, and you also get access to the hydro resonance. Basically, just a ton of things that I even made a separate dedicated video on, a list of reasons why Yelan and Xingqiu are good together if you choose to run them in the same team. With that said, Yelan can be a good solo hydro option in many different reaction team comps, but can also shine with Xingqiu. With that initial information out of the way though, let's go over some example Yelan teams where she really does shine. Do keep in mind that a lot of these teams are very flexible in terms of which exact units you're going to be using. Starting things off, for a vaporized team, she shines exceptionally well with Hu Tao in some of Hu Tao's best teams overall. These teams include Hu Tao with double hydro, Yelan and Xingqiu, and then the last slot is a very flexible option of pretty much any good support like Zhongli, Kazuo Official, or even Xiangling. If that wasn't enough, you can even run Yelan as a solo hydro option with Hu Tao, but as we saw in those teams, your hydro application is a bit lower, so you just have to make sure your Hu Tao is still vaporizing by adjusting your combo. Now, while Hu Tao is the sort of staple vaporize carry and the best one to use with Yelan, you can use pretty much any pyro unit like genuinely even Diluc, Yoimiya, Xiangling, or pretty much any of the pyro carries can work as well if you want to use them. Other teams include Dendro teams, which is a big reason why I'm remaking this guide, as Yelan shines exceptionally well with Bloom and its sub-reactions of Hyper Bloom and Burgeon. In fact, pairing Yelan with a Dendro character is usually just a pretty good option, and while there are other options like Kokomi, Xingqiu, or other hydros, Yelan works exceptionally well when you want single target damage and just a good form of fast hydro. These teams are very flexible and can include Hyper Bloom, where you're using a Dendro character, a hydro character, and an Electro one, and are some of the strongest teams in the meta right now. This right here is an example team where the last slot is very flexible, but even if you don't have Nahida, you can use a off-field Dendro support like your main character, an Electro character to Hyper Bloom on full elemental mastery, Yelan as your hydro, and then the last slot is flexible. Here we could use Sucrose to be your on-field auto attacker, but you could also use someone else like Nahida to attack on field, someone like Alhaitham, which we'll cover shortly, Ayato, or so many others. The same can be said in a Burgeon team where you would replace your Electro character with a Pyro one like Toma. If that wasn't enough, you can even play Quick Bloom, where you're proccing Quicken and Hyper Bloom, allowing your Dendro DPS like Alhaitham to spread, while also proccing the Hyper Bloom reaction through your other supports. For Bloom-centered team, you can run Yelan with Nilou, but do keep in mind that a team like this is very flexible. The last slot can be pretty much any character that is either Hydro or Dendro, but Yelan can be one of the better options for a strong source of off-field damage. To keep listing some reactions, let's talk about non-Dendro teams for a bit. Electrocharge Taser teams can work very well, and while typically I use a team that runs Beto here, when you want the highest single target damage possible, this this is one of the strongest teams, as genuinely, Yelan, Xingqiu, and Fischl can shred pretty much any boss instantly when you pair them with an Anemo support like Sucrose, who can help drive the team. This team comp is incredibly powerful, especially single target, and Yelan shines very well here. Do keep in mind that while a lot of these teams run Sucrose, part of this reason is because she can auto attack on field, but if you already have a main DPS, Kazuha does have very good synergy with Yelan as well, so do keep that in mind. Moving on, Yelan can even work as a replacement to Xingqiu in certain teams. While as I said, it's not the best option, if you want to run her in a team like for example with Raiden or with Xiangling, you definitely can, and the same can be said in even a freeze team with someone like Ayaka, just as long as you are normal attacking and proccing Yelan's dice from off field. Because of that, pretty much any reaction that wants a Hydro character can use Yelan. Like genuinely, she's so flexible that I don't really know where to start or end in this team section. You can use her either alone as your Hydro option, or especially what I recommend in a double Hydro team, with her best teams being Vaporize, Hyper Bloom, and Electrocharged. With that said, she's just so good that even as an off-field support in a team that isn't even relying on reactions, like for example a Shao team, as long as you're normal attacking in between your plunges, you can even run Yelan and she can actually be a decent option just because of how good her kit is. And so yeah, genuinely Yelan is just a very flexible Hydro support, really good at dealing off-field damage, applying good Hydro, especially when paired with Xingqiu, but even alone in so many teams can be a very viable and strong unit, who I highly recommend if you have the Primo Gems for and if you want to build her. I really like her design wise and gameplay wise, and I hope through this video you found everything that you need to know about Yelan. Do keep in mind that while I usually include a showcase in my video, since Yelan is such a just standard flexible support, I just tried to include footage of many different teams in the team section and throughout the video instead of just showing one showcase of another DPS shining. With that said, I really hope this video was helpful. If there's anything you want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. Feel free to like and sub if you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.